Hey everyone, tonight we're going to talk about the difference between traditional and digital art, a little bit about the virtues of both, and I'm going to advocate a little bit for digital art, just for maybe any traditional artists out there who haven't given it a shot. And we're going to paint this pair and just do some really basics. So it'll be from a technical standpoint, sort of like an Artrage 101 or digital painting 101, and then from a conceptual standpoint, it'll just be sort of like my case for the relevance of digital art for if you're ever talking to a traditional artist that might not get into it. So here we go. First thing I want to do is just sample with the Alt key. I want to I've got the oil brush set with these settings. This is some of my favorite settings, and I'm just going to Alt key sample the shadow color down here. You'll notice the darkest dark in the scene is this occluded shadow right here where the pear is coming in to contact with and kind of blocking almost all light that's down there right between the pear and the surface of the table. I'm going to sample that color and just paint with that. I'm going to close down layers because we're not going to use that right now, and I'm going to hold the shift key, which lets me, as I drag my cursor across the canvas, the virtual canvas, it's going to change the size of the brush if I hold shift down. So I'm going to get a relatively small brush and do some basic mapping of the design. Whenever I'm painting, I always just do the basic line work, and I call this there we go. I call this the mapping phase. I'm just going to map it. So a lot of times when you see a young artist draw, or maybe an experienced artist draw, they might start a little bit like this. You'll see them kind of find a starting point and then work very carefully, pushing way too hard as they kind of work their way around the pair, like so. And they might make a mistake right there and then go, oh crap, and then press Control Z and then do it again, and then again, and again, and again, and 20 minutes later they just are exclaiming how much they hate pairs. Instead, what I want to do is just make it simple, everything really simple. We're just going to do this. We're going to look for angles. See the angle of the side of the pair. And seeing the angle at kind of that midpoint of the big volume at the lower side, lower portion of the pair. The next angle there, as the pair turns toward the base, and so on and so on. We work our way around. It's not perfect, nor does it need to be, because these aren't sort of contour lines, or this isn't the kind of careful line work that we need because we're going to create our own kind of personal coloring book. What this is just sort of a crude map of where everything is going to go. Knowing that we're going to paint over everything anyway, why spend a tremendous amount of time making perfect line work that's just going to end up going by the wayside? Something to take note of is just look at how this shadow, how far, like if you were to draw a line straight down from the widest point of the pair, how that shadow doesn't come up to that edge. So we make sure it only comes in this far, and then, or comes out that far. Then we also note how close that shadow is to the very base of the pair here. It's pretty narrow, kind of thin space. The next thing we got to note is how far up the shadow creeps into sort of the body of the pair, and I'd say only to about right here, which if you were to measure is about 1/4 to 1/3 up the height of the pair. Notice also, surprisingly, this shape right here is pretty flat. Sometimes I see a lot of young artists make shadows that look like this. It's not necessary. Just look closely at the shape that you see. Look at the angle and the angle. You could almost draw it with 1-2 marks, and that would be it. Also need to put in the horizon line, just this kind of where the background meets the table surface. And if you guys like painting this pair, go for it. Copyright free. I took this picture in my living room. Just put this. You're seeing the back of one of my canvases, and then kind of this masonite board I prepped for a painting, and then this is just sitting on a table linen. So go for it. The other thing I might do in this beginning phase is just block in, again with those kind of angular marks, some of the shadow space, just so I can delineate the light from the dark in this image. So there it is, perfect little pair, right? All right, step 2, let's block in the darks, and do that backwards. This is our value step, and value is super important. Since we have a white canvas, as bright as it's going to get out here, we need to get our darks laid in. And what I'd like to do with this is make, oops, I'm using Photoshop shortcuts. Okay, what I like to do with this is make it darks first, big brush, so I don't worry about doing any detail. I'm going to continue to sample from different portions of the shadow here so that I can get a really good approximation of how the value shifts ever so subtly as the shadow moves away from the object, casting the shadow. You usually see the darkest, crispiest little shadows close to the object, and then get a little bit more reflected light into the shadow as you get further away from that object that is causing the shadow to exist. So there's that. Just sort of sketch that in. Don't have to worry about it. Does not have to be perfect. We're going to be painting, throwing a lot more paint on this canvas, and in the midst of all that, we're going to I'm going to thin this down just a little bit more. And in the midst of all that, we are going to be painting over a lot of what we're doing right now. So you can see that using the oil brush, it's one of my favorite digital tools, and it does a really, really good job of approximating real oil paint with like either a filbert or a flat or any kind of brush that you would love to have. You can create that here with these presets and these settings that you have in Artrage. So again, I'm just moving actually tremendously slowly. Usually I paint about twice this fast, and any of my students would attest to that. But it's kind of fun just at the end of the day to kind of have a casual hangout painting and just do some chatting. So as we work through here, all I'm going to do is put down local color. That's the color that is local to the area of the original reference image, and kind of work my way around until I have no more white space. As I'm doing this, I want to talk about the virtues of digital painting, digital art in general. I was a traditional oil painter from the age of 12, and I had an amazing mentor. His name is Ray Vanilla. He still lives down in New Mexico. He is truly he's a man I think about almost every day to this day. He was formative in the way that I think about art and about learning and about life. He was in every sense of the word my mentor, and a magnificent artist. Worked for Disney. He was a top publicity artist for them. Worked on Mary Poppins. Did a ton of things for them. And had a bunch of other roles in a really vast career. He abandoned ship with respect to the whole commercial art world, and one day was just kind of walking down the street and saw this amazing Nikolai Feshin painting in a gallery. Just basically picked up and moved out west. He was living right there in the heart of it all in California, and then just said, hey, I'm out of here. This amazing painting by this Russian artist who's living out near Taos in Taos it just changed his life. So he up and left and joined a pretty interesting and thriving art community out there. I learned almost everything I know about painting from him. By comparison, I learned almost nothing at university about painting, and he was amazing. Everything that I think about as I work, I can hear his Brooklyn accent, his Italian Brooklyn accent in my ear almost all the time, and he's the one that was instrumental in kind of giving me this process as a sort of working platform for making a painting. It was just to sort of very crudely block in all the necessary data, and then from there, with the line work in the beginning, and then from there you start blocking all your values. It's going from dark to light, and work as much of the canvas as you can, and remember that all value is relative, meaning that your lights and darks are truly connected to each other. That whether they are working or not depends on what's around them. And working big, lack of detail, thinking about everything as a study, all of that stuff comes from him. And in any of my videos that you'll see, a lot of the theory, the concept, the process comes out of this really rich history that he was a part of. And so I painted with him all through my teenage years and in through my 20s before I took up teaching, which is another passion of mine. And I went to visit him a few years into being a teacher, and of course that changes your life, because you never can estimate how much time the classroom is going to take away from your studio time, but it's always worth it. It's just it's just a sacrifice, and it's a sacrifice I'm happy to make. But this one summer I went down to visit him in New Mexico, and he said, "Hey Daniel, are you painting?" And I said yes, but, and I kind of like, I felt like had sinned. I was confessing to him, yes, but I'm digital painting now. I'm not painting in oils as much, at least right now. And he looked at me, and I had this heavy burden on my heart, because I didn't want to disappoint him. I wanted to carry the torch, and I wanted his approval. He's one of the few real mentors I've ever had. And so that pause was immense, and I had no idea what he was going to say after it. But he exploded with this huge smile, and he said, "That's great. If I was your age, that's what I would be doing right now." We had a long talk about it, and it just opened my heart to this even more, because I'd fallen in love with it, just the medium and the speed of it and a bunch of things about it. But I needed to know, and this like childlike part of me needed to know it was okay, like the Godfather said it's okay, and Grandfather says it's okay, kind of thing. And more than okay, I had his blessing, and he was excited and wanted to learn about it and talk about it, and so we had a great time. We talked about it a lot. And nowadays I come into contact occasionally with traditional artists, or people that in education even, that don't get it. They think the first fallacy is this binary thinking that there's a sort of either or about any medium, any creative process. It happens too with traditional photography, the darkroom photography, or digital photography. People say, well, as if you have to choose a favorite, as though it's like some sort of political contest and you have to choose sides. That's not how it works, and hopefully it's not how it always has to work in politics either. But like the darkroom processes are different than digital photography, and it's a different craft. They're both valid, they're both awesome, and they're both a real blessing to creative people. I don't know if there's a much virtue in sort of staking your claim as to which one is authoritatively better or whatever, but I think the same thing is true in digital painting. Just think about it. Like, because it exists, it doesn't mean that traditional paint is going away. It's just a different tool. And I think the important question is not which one's better or which one's more valid, because they're both creative they're both creative tools. They're both valid creative spaces to work in, and they both allow for a level of mastery that is totally obvious. You can look at an amateur digital artist and a professional digital artist, and the work looks nothing like each other. They're so dissimilar. Same thing with a master oil painter versus an amateur oil painter. There's no comparison. And so let's talk about that for a second. When I was in my young 20s, I think I was 21 years old, I was showing in galleries in Taos, galleries in Colorado Springs, galleries in Denver. A Bend gallery in Denver, Rich Designs in Colorado Springs, and a couple of different ones in Taos. And this is when between the age of 19 and 21 years old. And I had a really, really vibrant oil painting career at that point already. Had my work featured in Southwest Art magazine, and it was really blowing up. So I have experience there. I have painting buddies that are just rocking it in the traditional art scene right now, and they'll book a workshop in a day, kind of thing. And then I have the same kind of context in the digital art realm, so I feel like I'm pretty well equipped to talk about both. And before I do, though, I just wanted to show you, we've sort of blocked in everything slowly and just kind of ploddingly. Just having fun with this one tonight. Notice how it's all there. It's rough and it's unfinished, but it's all there. you know, I have a preference for this kind of look. I love it. Other artists may want something a little more refined. I'll show you how to get there though. Just check this out in Artrage. I can go into the menus here and duplicate the layer. What that does is oftentimes I paint with the paint a little thinner. I like having a little bit of a dry brush feel. I'm a fan of Nikolai Feshin. His impact on my mentor was significant. My mentor's impact on me was significant, so there's a sort of lineage there. So you can thicken the paint just by duplicating it, and it'll have a little bit more of that full finish. I can also take that layer and then merge it down so I can go back to just having one layer, but for the sake of this painting I'm just going to leave it as is. Grab the palette knife, and using that shift, I'm just going to hold shift down, and then use the stylus to drag across the graphics tablet to make it a little bit bigger or smaller as needed. So as I'm taking this next step, which is just refining the edges, which would kind of be step 3 here in this little painting process, I just want to talk about digital and traditional. I think I was talking with one of my buddies, Troy, who now works at, the Chicago Institute of the Art. He's like a professor there. It's awesome for him. I remember we were talking in high school. He says, "Why do you paint?" You know, and so we had this great talk about it. And I think I might have brought this up in one of my other videos, but he said that his rationale, his reason, his motivation for painting is to learn, as though that's how the artist gets their hands on the world and figures out what it's made of, you know. And I thought that was the best answer ever. Now that said, if that's true, if that's the way that you're interfacing with the world, allowing yourself to engage with the world, digital has a lot to offer, and in some cases it has more to offer than traditional. Because that whole creative process of the kind of inception of the idea, the recognition of, ooh, I'm going to pursue that, the inquiry and research that immediately follows, you know, ooh, what is this thing? What am I looking at? What is it related to? How does it connect to what I know? What don't I know about it, etc. So you start to learn, right? That research and an inquiry. And then that whole exploration, creation, discovery portion where you start making work about it, you start digging into whatever it is, and this explosion of knowledge and connection that happens when you're doing that. And at the end of that creative process, when you start to transfer all of that learning and knowledge to whatever it is that next grabs your attention, that whole creative process the time frame from start to finish, from inception to completion, can be dramatically compressed, because you're not in digital, especially with so much research being done online and so much of the reference imagery and inspiration imagery and other artists and contacting people and email and, you know, everything, Instagram, whatever, all that being digital, it accelerates the sharing, it accelerates the production. It's just, there's no arguing that it's faster. Anyone that I know that does both traditional and digital, and they work in like the entertainment industry, you know, games, movies, whatever, they're all working digitally because it's just so much faster that it's the only way to kind of keep up with the production schedules. And if that's true in that industry where deadlines are like God, you have to hit these deadlines, your production has to be, you know, you're always behind, that kind of thing. Then it's also true in other arenas. And as I watch students of all ages play with digital media and then traditional media, I see there is such an acceleration of that start to finish creative process with digital that there's almost, I mean, it almost makes it a liability to work traditionally, because you're losing so much of that creative, like you get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 10 times the amount of practice with that whole creative loop, that whole process from start to finish in digital than you would with traditional. It's astounding. And from a student perspective or learner perspective, it's very, very, very good for you to go through that over and over and over. Start, finish, track an idea, realize it sucks, start over, track an idea, find out you hit a wall, it's technical, it's conceptual, it's whatever, start over. Start an idea, find something that's working, complete a design, complete a painting, complete a conceptual project, and then finish it, share it, start over. However it goes, that whole process is so fast when you're doing it in digital, that there is just huge gains from an educational standpoint, and even from a professional standpoint, as we've said. Some people would make the argument, well, you know, if it takes longer, don't you appreciate it more? And what I would say to that person is, maybe, but it depends what your goals are, right? Like, I could make the claim that, well, then why are you going and buying paint at the art store, right? Like, you need to be mixing your own pigments. So why are you buying the pigments? Why aren't you going and mining the minerals out of the soil yourself? Because don't you appreciate it more? Well, you know, it gets ridiculous. So at some point you go back far enough, and you know, you're mining ore out of the soil so that you can get raw minerals, so that you can grind them down by hand, so that you can make you know, these mineral-based pigments that you can then mix into linseed oil, that you can finally then weave your own linen so that you can make a canvas, and you know, plane down your own wood to make the stretcher bars to build your own canvas. Like, well, then a month later you get to do a painting, and yeah, you would appreciate that painting, but I think it's a lot of lost time. And so if your goal is to learn to paint and to tackle what that means, you think about what is two-dimensional art, and you think about that it's the illusion of space. You're always just creating illusion. You know, two-dimensional art is always illusion. Look at the illusion that I've created here, this illusion of using lights, midtones, you know, these halftones, and then darks to create the illusion of depth, form, etc. And so I'm a magician. I'm making illusions here. Well, if that's what I want to learn through that process, the way that I'm manipulating space through arrangement of objects in that space. I would rather not spend my day digging minerals out of the soil, or worrying about even how long it's going to take for this layer of paint to dry in an oil painting. I would rather keep digging into the painting itself. There's an immediacy about painting that I love, and there's an incredible immediacy about painting that in digital that I really love too. So, you know, with traditional, one of the big complexities is that you're always dealing with moisture content, whether it's a water-based or oil-based paint. There's a lot that you have to learn about with that, and you know, there's no way around it. Like in digital, there's no comparison. You have nothing like that to think about, and so there are huge gaps in just like in digital and traditional photography. There are just things you don't learn in one media versus another, but you can't dismiss one or the other either, because they are both so valid. But looking at it from just the learner's perspective, I think I would prefer to have kids, you know, or new artists starting digitally, if they weren't too afraid of the tech hurdle that can sometimes be there for different people. But because you also have this button, you also have Control Z, how I can just undo something. I could try something out and then undo it. It allows for a lot of risk taking without it actually being risk. And you know, that may not be like real life, and that there may be some sort of like gap there, but there is something really cool about it too, which is I think I always love teaching my students to have a sort of bravado as they work. And that's something you know, just to take risks and let things fail, and it gets ugly sometimes, etc. And I want that to be a part of their practice. And with digital, it's very easy to instill that as a value, as a part of their studio practice. And then I very clearly see that mentality transfers over when they work traditionally. They're more willing to take risks. They're more willing to fail, because they know what it looks like just to pack it up and start all over again. And I love that. So here you can see, I just for the sake of it, just for the sake of the fun of it, I grabbed the airbrush, and I'm just kind of using this real wispy little airbrush default preset, just to be the equivalent of like a dodge and burn tool, just to give my picture a little bit darker darks in some areas and some lighter lights in some areas, because I wanted to push the value scale just a little bit. You'll notice that there's a sort of foggy or smoky edge to it, which I don't prefer, but it works well in just kind of masking in some of these darks. So what I'm going to come back and do is, using the palette knife again, going to knock down a little bit of the work that I just did give it a little bit more of a consistent edge with the rest of the picture. I do like it having a softer edge, but I didn't want it quite as smoky as it was back there. So here's like a really comfortable, safe way to paint a pear. I hope you enjoyed watching. I used the oil brush with these settings. You can screenshot that if you want. I used the palette knife at default settings. You can just click here and go default settings and you'll get this. And I used the default settings again on that guy, so the airbrush. And you can see how wonderfully cool and fast and fun it is to paint digitally. Couple more things about that digital traditional thing. People talk about difficulty, and as those that also means difficulty equals validity. You know, and I get that there's something to that. You know, it's like climbing Mount Everest is significant versus, you know, just climbing the foothills behind our houses. But again, like, different tool, different purpose. I think if we get too busy setting up hierarchies about what's, you know, valid and what's not, I think we're just wasting our breath. I think it's sort of like fighting over what is a better instrument, a violin or a cello. You know, they're both amazing. They're both part of the orchestra or whatever, but they're both very different. Hey, speaking of different, I wanted to show you, Artrage has some very bizarre tools. This one threw me off when I first looked at it, this sticker spray. And the first time I clicked on it, I just, you know, brushed across the screen and I got these little balls, these like marbles. I was almost offended. I was like, why is that tool in my art program? And it's like for children, right? I was like, this is not for me. But then months later, and it was an obnoxiously long time later, I started dinking around with it, and I noticed there's this subset here in the menu called brush heads, and in there you can pick all kinds of different stuff. And let me show you a quick way to get to it. Under presets, you can see right now I have the option of using black pearls, dice, dominoes, and fireballs. Fireballs just cracks me up. You got to see this. That is horrible. Okay, so I don't know why that exists, but it does. I'm never going to paint with fireballs, but I know sometimes my students love it, especially the younger ones. So maybe that's why it's there. But this one, this airbrush spats, I think is really cool. So you see that effect? That's me just using kind of a white mark. Now, you know, let me go back. There's a lot of cheesy fun stuff in here. Good for the kids. But here, and this is the stuff that I gravitate toward. And this airbrush thing is pretty sweet because if you notice the pear, I zoom in on it, you see all the speckling? You know, it's just what pears look like. I can come over here and I can tone down the spray rate. And it's not liking that I'm doing that, but there we go. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to tone it down even more. And watch this. I'm going to make a new layer and very gently brush some of these darker marks. I'm going to make my brush actually pretty big, so I'm going to click in here and just grab like a 300 size brush. And oh, that's too big. All right, never mind. Let's go back. Let's do 200. Let's see how that works. Perfect. So I'm just brushing in these little dots everywhere. And the goal here is to give it, I don't know, sort of playfully a little bit more texture. This doesn't seem like a very serious way to get this done, but check it out. I can do that, and then I can use the palette knife on this separate layer. This is layer 2 here. Let me make this a little bigger. And I can kind of knock it down and just I'm kind of grinding on it, but you can really knock it down a lot or a little, whatever. But then what I'm going to do is, here's our opacity is 100%. Can take that down to say, you know, 60, 50%, and it's pretty cool because if you look at now the drawing without it, having that texture there, it does add something. So I learned that when I was playing with the presets on this little sticker spray tool, that there's actually some cool stuff in there. There's a bristle brush, which is pretty good. I really like it actually. There's a bunch of stuff in there. So it took me a long time before I gave that whole subset of tools a fair shake. But once I did, I learned that there was a heck of a lot in there that was worth digging into. Um, I'm just playing around with this bristle brush right now, and you can see how cool it is. It does a lot of good work. And again, adding a little bit more texture to my piece, which I can totally get behind. I'm not too much of a fan when something looks super pristine. I have to feel like, well, that's what my reference picture already looks like that. I want to let the paint kind of sing a little bit and let the brush do the talking. And but to each their own. We got to do what we like. So for me, I can do both, and I can enjoy both, but I prefer more of the time than not, most often, having it a little rougher and textured than not. So yeah, here's a little pear painting, and I hope you enjoyed it. And let me know your thoughts. I want to know how many of you guys are traditional and digital painters out there. Hopefully a handful. It'd be interesting to hear from you. And yeah, that's a little Artrage 101 tutorial, how to paint a pear using the oil brush, the palette knife, and then a little bit of the airbrush and the sticker spray brush of all things. Take care, you guys. Hope you have a good one.